What's up, everyone? Welcome to the video. We are here talking week 7 of the NFL season on DraftKings and FanDuel. And as you can see, there's a dog in the background. I guess he is joining us for today's video. But anyway, if this is your first time here, what's up? My name is Pennell. I break down NFL and NASCAR DFS each and every single week on this channel. And in these specific videos, we go position by position, breaking down some of my favorite players at each spot. And then as we progress through it, we'll build a lineup more so for a single entry tournament build to see what fits. And then I'll run the optimizer at the end to see who's popping the most as of right now with the projections and ownership projections that I currently have in place on Friday morning. And if that sounds all fine and dandy to you, you can do me one small thing in return, and that's leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel if you think you're going to keep coming back, as it makes it easier on both of our parts. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below, and it doesn't even have to be serious. You can make fun of me, you can be nice to me, or if you have a serious question, I don't care, but whatever helps. And as always, we will start with the quarterback position. And also, if you want access to this spreadsheet that I'm showing you guys for free on YouTube, link is down below in the description for that. It's got the entire player pool, all the data you'd ever need, cheat sheets, ownership projections, the optimizer, all that fun stuff. And I don't just cover the NFL, I do NBA each and every single day in a similar fashion, and update that all the way up until lock or even after lock, depending on all the news, which if you guys are familiar with NBA DFS, it's absolutely hectic. And then I cover NASCAR still, which is currently going on. So if you want access to that stuff, link can be found down below in the description, all at a pretty fair price point. And Patreon no longer charges you on the first of the month. It's a recurring 30-day cycle, so it's the end of the month right now. So it's still fine to sign up now because they changed the way they do their billing. Anyway, let's get into it. We'll start with Lamar Jackson, the most expensive quarterback that I want to talk about. He's $8,000 on DK, $8,800 over on FanDuel. Now, I guess the big thing here is depending on Mark Andrews' injury status, because if he happens to be out, I still think Lamar Jackson's playable, but it makes stacking with him pretty hard. You could look at Isaiah Likely, which we'll talk about him a little bit in the tight end section, but it would really suck if Andrews is out because he's definitely the #1 target, and he seems to always have really good games versus Cleveland. But even if Andrews is out, I still think Lamar is going to be playable. The Browns defense has been pretty bad this year. On paper, you would think they have a decent defense. I mean, they have some really good names on there, but they've just been absolutely awful. Joe Woods, the defensive coordinator, has put together some pretty poor game plans this season. And defensively versus the run, they've been absolutely awful, which is kind of the main thing I care about with Lamar Jackson. Whatever he does through the air, that's just icing on the cake. But I just kind of care about what he does on the ground. He's averaging 75 rushing yards per game, which is basically a built-in 2 passing touchdown floor. When you think about it, 4 points per passing touchdown. He's getting nearly 8 points per game on the ground. Also, nearly a third of a rushing touchdown per game and 3.6 yards per carry, and close to 7 designed runs, and obviously all the scrambles they have to add in as well. And the Browns defensively versus the pass, they're 27th DVOA and bottom half of the league when it comes to fantasy points allowed per game to the quarterback position. But with Lamar Jackson being such a threat on the ground, he always seems to have good games versus Cleveland. I think he's a fine option either way, although if Mark Andrews does happen to be out, that is a bit of a downgrade for him, but I still think he's a fine option at home. Then we have Patrick Mahomes, who's going to be one of my favorite tournament plays on this slate. Don't think he's going to have insane ownership or anything. He comes in at $7,800. He's on the road in San Francisco, who just added Christian McCaffrey. We'll see how much he plays this week or if he plays at all. But we have a 25.5 point implied team total here, a 3-point spread, and this is a pretty fun game to stack up. Lots of good options here, again, depending on if CMC does play, but even if he doesn't, you have Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle on the other side. And then for Patrick Mahomes, you have Travis Kelce and his slew of wide receivers, who I don't really know who it's going to be each week. You have MVS, Juju Smith-Schuster. It's kind of just a close your eyes and hope for the best. But Mahomes has been awesome this year. Nearly 3 passing touchdowns per game, close to 300 passing yards, 7.6 yards per attempt, and a 106 QBR. And if you're looking at how the 49ers have fared versus quarterbacks this season, it's a pretty tough matchup. But the thing is, I don't really care about matchups at all for the Chiefs offense. They always seem to get the job done. Like even last week versus the Bills, you could have said, well, it's a very difficult matchup. I don't want to play the Chiefs. But Patrick Mahomes, he was still fine. I know Josh Allen ended up outscoring him at the end because he got that touchdown to Dawson Knox, but Mahomes still had a very good game, even though he did have 2 interceptions. But they're allowing the third fewest points per game to the quarterback position, less than 200 passing yards per game. I'm still fine with it. If he's going to be low in tournaments, I always want to get some shares of Patrick Mahomes because he can always break a slate. Then we have Justin Herbert, $7,200. And the first 2 guys I don't think are going to be too popular for cash games. But I think all 4 of these guys that we're about to talk about are cash game viable. It seems like usually most weeks we have the consensus cash game quarterback. I'm not really sure we have that this week because there's a few of these guys where I'm like, yeah, I could see myself playing him. I could also see myself playing him. Like last week, you played Josh Allen in cash. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This week, I think you can make a case for really all 5 of these guys, maybe besides Patrick Mahomes. But even then, I could see you making a case for that. But Herbert, looking at his numbers on the season, and also probably know a lot of you have PTSD from what he did last week if you are in a legal betting state, because DraftKings did the sportsbook bonus and he did not throw a touchdown, I think, for the second time in 38 or 39 games, something like that. Just absolute brutal beat. But if you put your sour feelings behind, I think he's in for a bounce back week this weekend with a near 29-point implied team total versus Seattle Seahawks, 6.5-point spread, and a 51-point over-under. This is going to be a very popular game on all accounts. Could get Keenan Allen back, which would be a nice boost as well, but we'll see how that situation is going to unfold. But he's at nearly 300 passing yards per game, just not a ton of touchdowns, but those will come in nearly 40 pass attempts per game as well. And if you're looking at how the Seahawks have fared versus quarterbacks this year, 26 DVA versus the pass, and 25th in fantasy points allowed per game to the quarterback position. So Justin Herbert, one of my top projected quarterbacks on the slate, playing at home in a dome, don't have to worry about the weather, versus a really bad pass defense, and he's got tons of options to stack with. I think he's an excellent option in all formats. Joe Burrow, $6,900, had a great game last week versus the New Orleans Saints. I think it's a pretty good matchup here versus the Atlanta Falcons at home, and near 27-point implied team total here. And it's very easy to stack with Joe Burrow because we know where the ball is going to go. It's going to go to Jamar Chase, it's going to go to T. Higgins, and sometimes it goes to Hayden Hurst and Tyler Boyd, but those are more so secondary options. But Burrow's not overly expensive, just under 7K here. They're going to throw the ball a lot. The only thing shaky here, this offense, is the offensive line, but I think he will be fine versus the Falcons here. I think he makes for an excellent turn-up play. And honestly, you can make a fringe case for him being a cash game quarterback this week. I would not have a problem with that. Although Dak Prescott does profile pretty well for me at $6,700. I love the Cowboys offense this week, and you kind of have to. I mean, the Detroit Lions defense has been absolutely terrible so far this season. If you're looking at how they've done versus the pass, dead last, 32nd DVOA, and they're also allowing the fourth most points per game to the quarterback position at over 24 points per game. Also giving up some rushing yards as well in 270 passing yards per game. I think the Cowboys offense is in a great spot. It's very easy to stack them up with guys like CeeDee Lamb, who's entirely too cheap this week, below 7K. You also have Michael Gallup, who's pretty cheap, and even the running backs look pretty good, and Dalton Schultz is in the 3K range. So if you want to stack up the Cowboys versus arguably the worst defense in the NFL, it is quite easy to do that this week, although it is going to come at the cost of high ownership. And then if you're looking for a cheap option, I think a lot of people might look at Derek Carr just because they want to pick on Houston, but I prefer Josh Jacobs in that matchup, who we're about to talk about. But I like Geno Smith here, $5,600. I know it's never really fun to play Geno, but this year it's actually not been too bad. Although last week versus the Arizona Cardinals wasn't really the best game in the world, but his price point, you don't really have to ask for too much here. And this is going to be a high-scoring game. I expect the Seahawks to be trailing. And if everyone's going to be playing Kenneth Walker, you might be able to get some decent ownership on Geno here, although I'm not expecting him to go entirely too low owned, but he's definitely viable here. And similar to some of these other quarterbacks, it's very easy to stack Geno because the ball goes to mostly Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf. So if you want to double stack, it's really not that hard to do, and it's not that expensive either, and it's very easy to run that back with a option from the Chargers. And moving over to our lineup, like I said, there's not really an obvious quarterback this week. I think Dak Prescott's going to be pretty popular. I mean, I never even mentioned he's returning from injury, so we don't really have much data from him so far this year. But I just think because of the price point, Joe Burrow had a big game last week. I could see people going back to that well, which, again, I have no problem with Burrow. I already talked him up. But let's just plug in Dak here. We already know who we're going to stack him with, but I'll still wait once we hit wide receivers. But CeeDee Lamb, as you can probably tell, will make this lineup. And moving on to the running back position, a nice list here this week. Like I always say, we don't usually have that many great running back options, but to be honest, it's kind of a loaded position this week. Lots of good spots, whether you want to spend up, go in the middle, or down low. We'll start up top with Austin Eckler, $8,300, who had a slow start to the season. It's only a couple games, though, but then he's been fantastic since then. I think it's a great matchup versus Seattle here. I mean, he's a 6.5 home point favorite running back with a near 29-point implied team total in a game with over a 50-point over-under. And he's heavily involved in the passing game. Not a workhorse on the ground, but he's still going to be the main back here and probably going to get you close to 20 touches in this game. So everything screams play him, especially in a plus matchup versus Seattle. He was 27th versus running backs and 21st DVA versus the run. And he had a monstrous amount of targets last week. I forget the exact amount, but it was a lot. It was in the double digits. He's averaging 8 targets per game, close to a 20% target share. And that's on an offense that throws the ball quite a bit. So that's a very healthy number, one of the best in the league. And he's a touchdown scoring machine. So if you have the money for Eckler, I like him a lot. If you're not getting involved with Justin Herbert or like a stack without Austin Eckler, I think you're making a mistake because he's definitely a main threat in the passing game. So I think it's totally fine to correlate those two. And a lot of people don't want to play the quarterback with the running back, but when it's a guy like Eckler, who's a hybrid mix, you can certainly do that. Saquon Barkley at $7,900. He's had an amazing season so far. He comes in as 3-point dog on the road in Jacksonville. I kind of prefer using Barkley when he's a home favorite because if you look at the splits, his fantasy points per game go way up, but still a fine spot here versus Jacksonville. And if you look at the numbers on the season, he's a workhorse, going to get pretty much all the touches in this backfield. 20 carries per game, over 100 rushing yards, 5.2 yards per carry, and has a 17% target share in this offense. Although Jacksonville has been decent DVOA-wise versus the run, 9th DVOA, but they're also 26 versus fantasy running backs and giving up a lot through the air, which Saquon Barkley can certainly do as a pass-catching back, so I think he's a fine option as well. But I do trust the Chargers offense a little bit more than the Giants. That's why I'd kind of lean towards Eckler, but Barkley's still fine. Leonard Fournette, $7,700. He gets to face the awful team of the Carolina Panthers, and their team is just awful now, especially with no CMC. I mean, they got absolutely nobody besides DJ Moore, and even then, they don't have a quarterback to give them the football, and they're on the road. And the Buccaneers lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers last week, and they're still 10.5-point favorites on the road in Carolina here, 25.5-point implied team total. Probably not going to be the prettiest game in the world. I don't really expect it to stay too close. I think Tampa can look solid in this game, at least a lot better than what they did versus Pittsburgh, but I guess we can never be so sure. But Fournette's fine from a volume standpoint. It's just not going to be fun rostering him because I feel like when he gets the ball, he just runs into the back of the line. He's going to get you like 3 yards. He's averaging 3.6 yards per carry, 16 rushing attempts, just not doing too much in the yards department or the touchdown department. But what makes him very viable is that he gets a lot of checkdowns from Tom Brady. Close to 6 targets per game, 15% target share, and 40 receiving yards per game as well. So if you want to stack Tom Brady, I did not put him in the quarterback list. He's okay. I just don't think this game's going to be super competitive, and there's not really any run back options that I like from the Carolina Panthers, so it's not that appealing in tournaments. But Fournette's fine from a volume standpoint. I have no problem with that. If you are not using the passing attack from the Cincinnati Bengals, it makes some sense to get exposure to Joe Mixon because this offense is going to put up points in this matchup at home versus Atlanta. They're 27-point implied team total. He's a home favorite running back, 6-point favorite, and he gets a lot of volume. It's just he has not been efficient with those touches this year, similar to Leonard Fournette. He's actually a very similar play to Fournette, to be honest. I mean, they're both around that 7K range. Both see 15-plus carries per game, and both see around 5 targets per game. 14% target share for Mixon, 15% target share for Fournette. It's just both these guys are not efficient. He can still get there without scoring a touchdown if he gets the dump-offs, but you really would prefer him to get into the end zone. But the Falcons have been 25th DVOA versus the run this year, but they've been a lot stiffer fantasy points-wise per game as they're kind of just mid-pack compared to being at the bottom of the field. But I think Joe Mixon's still in a fine spot here, but if you do roster him, you're kind of really banking on that touchdown. Josh Jacobs, $6,500. He is going to be pretty much the RB1 for most people this week. I think currently in projections, I have him as the RB2. I think maybe only behind Austin Eckler, but it is close. I can actually just pull that up for you guys. So yeah, I'm at 21 points, and then I have Eckler kind of right there with him. But I actually have Josh Jacobs as the highest projected running back on the slate. But it's a plus matchup. He gets all the work, and he's been involved in the passing game this season as well. So I don't really think there's any reason not to like Josh Jacobs in this spot. He's a 7-point favorite. He's playing at home versus one of the absolute worst run defenses in the league the past couple of seasons. And over a 26-point implied team total. But he's averaging around 100 yards per game this year, 5.4 yards per carry, close to 20 rushing attempts. He's been able to find the end zone, and also 3.6 targets per game, which equates to an 11% target share. And if you look at the Texans versus running backs this season, it's been very bad. 29th DVOA versus the run, allowing the most points per game, and almost 140 rushing yards, which is kind of exactly what they did last year. So Jacobs at this price point, if you're playing cash games, you are playing Josh Jacobs, and to be honest, it's going to be hard to get away from him in tournaments. But there are some pivot options, like Breece Hall at $6,200. He's also going to be pretty popular this week, but I don't think it's going to be quite as much as Josh Jacobs. But Hall's been amazing the past few weeks. He draws a kind of a tough matchup here versus Denver Broncos, but they've been just about mid-pack versus the run this season. And Breece Hall has involvement in the offense. He should get you 12, 15-plus carries, and he's going to be involved in the passing game as well, averaging 5 targets per game, with a 27% weighted opportunity share. Guy's talented, looks awesome. I like him a lot. If you want to get a pivot from Jacobs, I like him, but you can certainly play them both together. I'd have no problem with that. Then we have Zeke at $6,000. If you are not using the passing attack from the Cowboys, I would recommend getting some involvement with the rushing game. You could also throw in Tony Pollard in the mix, but Zeke, I think, is in line for a pretty good game here. I like this price point at $6,000. He's a touchdown favorite at home, 27-point implied team total. Pretty good over-under here. And his numbers on the season, about 16 carries per game, 4 yards per carry. Not really that involved in the passing game. Tony Pollard's a bit better at that, but he can get a dump off or 2 per game, but only under a 5% target share on the season. But it's really all about the matchup here versus Detroit. They're allowing the second most points per game to the running back position. They were second to dead last DVA versus the run, allowing 1.6 rushing touchdowns per game, which is extremely high, and close to 130 rushing yards. So Zeke in a great spot here. If you don't have the passing attack, I recommend getting a guy like Zeke or Pollard in. And then Kenneth Walker, $5,800 on the guy that's going to be very popular for cash games, but the Chargers have just been awful. I mean, awful versus the run this year. The Broncos didn't really get to show it. They gave Melvin Gordon 3 carries. Obviously, no Javonte Williams. Mike Boone got 1 or 2 touches in that game, I think. And then Latavius Murray, he did all right with the touches he got, but the Broncos didn't really take advantage of that poor run defense. But they're allowing the third most points per game to the running back position, and they're also 22nd DVA versus the run. And Walker has performed pretty well in the absence of Rashad Penny so far, so I like him a lot. He's going to be very popular for cash games. Moving back over to the lineup here, I know it feels like we're going to get a bit chalky here, but I'm going to have a hard time avoiding Josh Jacobs. I mean, it's just such a good spot versus Houston at that price point, and we can try to get different elsewhere. So at this point, we could spend it for running back. I don't really want to, though. So far this year, I felt a lot better about just going mid-range or cheap at running back because, I mean, if you're going to be cheap touches at the running back position, I will take that each and every single day. So honestly, it's going to be between probably Walker at $5,800 or Breece Hall at $6,200. I could see myself going either way. As of right now, let's just plug in Walker at $5,800. If we could upgrade that to Breece Hall, I wouldn't have a problem with that, but we have just over $5,000 left per player, which is pretty good after 3 spots. And moving on to the wide receivers, as always, a long list. All these guys are going to be great plays, and there's so many good wide receivers in the NFL, so it's really hard to choose between just a few of them. But to simple it down for you, it all really depends on who you're playing at quarterback, what games are you stacking, who's your run back options, and things like that. Because, yeah, we can look at wide receiver versus cornerback matchups, but all that stuff really doesn't matter that much, in my opinion. I think you kind of get caught up too much in the mess there. So I just look at it from a landscape point of view of, again, who am I stacking? Let's correlate our lineup, especially if you're playing in tournaments. Obviously, you can one-off in cash games, and I don't have a problem with that. But let me pull up the target distributions for you guys because that's more interesting to look at. Up top, we have Devontae Adams. He's one of those guys I think is fine as a one-off. I'm not too interested in the passing attack for this game for the Raiders. I just really like Josh Jacobs, but I don't think Derek Carr is going to suck. I think he can get you 2 to 3 touchdowns potentially. And his price point's not terrible, but I could really see this just being a big Josh Jacobs game. I don't think the Texans are going to be too competitive in this one, so I'm not really sure how much they're going to throw the ball. But Adams, he's obviously a fine option, just gets all the volume and touchdown scoring machine. Jamar Chase, if you are stacking with Joe Burrow, you need Jamar Chase or you need T. Higgins in your life. Both these guys are fine options. Jamar Chase has the big ceiling, but T. Higgins isn't too far off of him. It's just Jamar Chase. He's got the name value. He's got the best connection with Joe Burrow. He had a great game last week, kind of reminded you of what he did last year in his rookie campaign. 2 touchdowns, well over 100 yards, had the big 60-yard touchdown. That's just the upside and ceiling that Jamar Chase offers you each and every single week. And this is definitely a beatable matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons. But if you can't afford him, you still have T. Higgins, who's kind of, I don't want to call him the Walmart brand version of Jamar Chase. He's still pretty good as well. He's a former first-round pick, but I wouldn't say he's quite on Chase's level. But both guys are fine options, obviously. And then Deebo Samuel at $7,600. If you are stacking the Chiefs game up, say you have Patrick Mahomes and you have Travis Kelce, he's the obvious run back option. But if you want to get low ownership, you could look at Brandon Ayuk, who I know is not on this sheet, but I don't want to put every single wide receiver. But Deebo's fine, has a major role in this offense. Although if CMC does play, maybe we see that take down a little bit. Michael Pittman at $7,400. He's a guy that I don't think anybody's going to play this week, but I think that might be a mistake because if you're looking at the Titans versus wide receivers, they're allowing the second most points per game to the position, 46.2 points per game to wide receivers specifically, and well over 200 receiving yards. And Pittman is the alpha dog in this offense. He's seeing 10 targets per game on a 25% target share, 82 receiving yards per game, had a lot of targets last week. And I'm not really too interested in this game in general. I know a lot of people aren't either, so I don't think a lot of people will flock to Pittman at that price point. But if you have enough money for an expensive one-off, or if you want to get nuts and stack the Colts in this game and run it back with, say, a Derrick Henry, that's not something I'm really looking to do. But I think Pittman's a great tournament one-off this week. If you can get him in single-digit ownership in a really good matchup like Tennessee, I think you should try to take advantage of that. Amon-Ra St. Brown, $7,100. So in the lineup that we're building right now, we're stacking the Cowboys. So he's like the obvious run back option. So there's a decent chance we actually do see him in our build here. But he's at $7,100. He's seen nearly 10 targets per game, 28% target share. I know the Lions sucked in their last game, but I think they'll be better in this one in a dome. I think they just perform better in domes either way. I don't like it when they're on the road or outside in the elements. They seem to, at least Jared Goff seems to be a lot better when he's in a controlled environment. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's going to be fine from a volume standpoint, and he seems to find the end zone more often than not. CeeDee Lamb, he is probably the best wide receiver play on the slate. He's going to be insanely high owned. Most of these numbers come with Cooper Rush under center, but still 9 targets per game on a 33% target share, 40% market share of the team's air yards. You add in the fact that Dak Prescott's returning this week. That's a big bump to him. He is way too cheap. If you're playing cash games, I highly recommend playing CeeDee Lamb. And if you're using Dak Prescott, I would highly recommend getting him in as well. He's one of my highest projected wide receivers on the slate, actually. I think if I pulled the projections, I have Lamb as the second highest projected wide receiver out of all of this group here. Now, there might be someone I'm leaving off that's not in this player pool that we're looking at that's projected higher than him, but yeah, Lamb looks really good this week. And Detroit, if you look at their numbers, they're dead last DVA versus the pass and 25th versus wide receivers. We already mentioned T. If you're using Burrow, I'd stack him up. Chris Godwin, I'm not super interested in the Bucs this week. I just hate this Panthers game in general. I don't think it's going to be too high scoring, especially from the Panthers side of things. I don't really think the Bucs are going to have to keep their pedal on the gas. But if you're looking for a safe option, Chris Godwin, he's always safe for the targets. From Tom Brady, 7.5 targets per game, which is only an 18.5% target share, but he'll be safe, and it's just a matter of, does he find the end zone? If he doesn't, he'll be a fine cash game play, but if he finds the end zone, he can definitely make it or break it in tournaments. I just don't love the game environment. Tyler Lockett, $5,800. He's going to be really popular. Didn't do much last week, but he's still safe from a volume standpoint most of the time. Over 7 targets per game, close to 6 catches, 70 receiving yards. He also has a really nice 38% market share of the team's air yards. And if you are using Geno Smith, it makes a lot of sense to pair him up with Tyler Lockett. You could look at DK Metcalf. I didn't put him on here, but they're both fine. Drake London at $5,400. If you are stacking up the Bengals side with, like, say, Jamar Chase or Joe Burrow or T. Higgins, you're going to want a run back option. And if you're not using Kyle Pitts, Drake London's a fine option here. He's a 6-point dog on the road, but has a 33% target share, 7 targets per game, and also a 33% market share of the team's air yards. The Bengals defense hasn't been awful this year. They've been top 10 in terms of fewest points allowed per game to the position, specifically 2 wide receivers. But he's cheap, and if you're just looking to stack the game up and you're not using Pitts, London's fine. Michael Gallup, if you are stacking with Dak Prescott, he's just the secondary option there. Saw 7 targets in his last game, and that was with Cooper Rush. 7 targets from Dak Prescott would mean a whole lot more to me, and I like that price point. And everyone's going to be on CeeDee Lamb, so if you're just trying to get half the ownership or maybe even more than that, Gallup's fine at $5,100. Then Romeo Doubs at $5,000. It's just a pretty good spot here versus the Washington Commanders, who've been really bad versus wide receivers this season. 26 versus the position and allowing 185 receiving yards per game, specifically 2 wide receivers, and Dobbs is seeing just over 6 targets per game, which is very close to a 20% target share, although the Packers looked really bad last week versus the New York Jets, but I'd say the spot's just a little bit better. And after that, there is like no good cheap wide receivers that I like, but fortunately enough for us, there are some cheap tight ends that I want to talk about that should open up some salary for us. And moving back over to our lineup, it should be absolutely no surprise of what we do here, but we got to plug CeeDee Lamb in with Dak Prescott, and then I want a run back option. You could look at TJ Hawkinson, but I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is probably the best way to go here. He's $7,100, more expensive than CeeDee Lamb actually, but this is chalky. I don't think St. Brown's going to be super high owned though, so this should help us get at least a little bit of lower ownership. But for right now, we got Dak paired with CeeDee Lamb, ran back with Amon-Ra St. Brown, and 2 pretty good running back options. I'm going to leave wide receiver 3 blank for right now, but there's a decent chance we could double stack with Michael Gallup. But we'll see how I'm feeling after we talk about tight ends. And this is probably the longest list of viable tight ends we've had this year. Usually I have like 4 guys and only one of them I actually like. I just need more to talk about them. But honestly, lots of good options this week. Now, obviously, there's a major drop off from Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. Because yes, George Kittle's got a good name, but he's not anywhere close to those guys' production. And even then, Andrews is very questionable for this week. I would not be surprised if he misses. He did not practice on Thursday. I'm recording this before practice would happen on Friday, but if he doesn't give it a go today, I mean, there's a decent chance he misses this game. And Isaiah Likely would be a good option at $3,000 if we didn't have Dolcic. I'm not Dulce. I don't know how you pronounce it, but I like him at $2,500. We'll talk about him. Did score a touchdown on the Monday night game. But anyway, up top we have Travis Kelce, $8,000 versus San Francisco. I don't think a lot of people are going to go this route, but he is an amazing play almost every single week, and for some reason his ownership's just not ever that high. I realize it's because he's a tight end. A lot of people like to spend down and save some money, but I mean, if you're stacking the Chiefs, you got to play Travis Kelce with Mahomes. He's the guy that you know is going to get targets every single week. Everybody else can be kind of random, but 75 receiving yards per game, about 7 catches, close to 9 targets, over a touchdown per game, 24% target share. I know the 49ers are a tough defense, but I don't care, especially when you have Patrick Mahomes throwing the football. Andrews, no idea if he's going to play or not. If he does play, he's good to go. I like him a lot. I mean, he gets tons of volume, and he's really the only one that can match Kelsey's production, and he always seems to have good games versus Cleveland. I cannot back that up, but as a Browns fan, watching Andrews play them often, it seems like he always does well, and we forget to guard him. So I can't really speak on the statistics on that, but I know I've seen it from my own eyes. And then we have George Kittle at $5,300. Good spot versus KC. Their defense isn't that great. It's just, I don't know, I'm never a huge fan of playing San Francisco pass catchers, but they did have a decent game last week, seeing 5.5 targets per game, close to 5 catches, 45 receiving yards. It's all about really scoring a touchdown here for Kittle, which is not something he's done yet this year, but it's a smaller sample size. But the 8 out of 4.1 is not that pretty. Kyle Pitts at $4,300, the guy that just always disappoints. Fantasy football Twitter loves him, but I don't think he's that great, guys. I know he's talented, but it's just a really tough offense to be in. He did score a touchdown last week, which was nice, but still wasn't a great game. But he's fine as a run back option if you're stacking up that Bengals game. Gerald Everett, $4,000 if you're stacking up Seattle and Los Angeles. And you want a cheap pass catching option with Justin Herbert. He's seeing close to 6 targets per game, although with Donald Parham returning, that could hurt targets, obviously, because he's going to get some snaps, and he had a few catches last week. Dalton Schultz at $3,600. He's one of the reasons why I did not put Michael Gallup in the lineup yet, because I might go the Dalton Schultz route. He's going to return this week. Now, Ferguson and, was it Hendershot, Peyton something like that. They've been okay in the absence of Dalton Schultz, but he's still the tight end one of this offense, and we've seen him have really good games last year with Dak Prescott. So at that price point versus Detroit, he's definitely going to become in play. Hayden Hurst, if you're looking for a weird stacking option with Joe Burrow, you could go that route, but it really just depends on if he scores a touchdown or not. Like, yeah, he's seeing close to 5 targets per game, but 30 yards and 3 catches isn't going to break the slate for you. But if he gets into the end zone, that's when it can work out. Then we have old Greg here, $2,500. He is the bare minimum. I think he's going to be the cash tight end this week because he really opens up your lineup. And he had 3 targets, 44 yards on 2 catches and a touchdown in his first game with an 8 out of 11.3. Now, I know it's only 3 targets, so it's a very small sample size. But at this price point, he's going to be the tight end one of this offense. We had Albert O inactive last week, and then Sauber's been dealing with an injury. So assuming he gets the full-on role here, hard to beat that at a minimum price point. And then my absolute favorite part of these videos is always talking defenses because they're so predictable and very easy to know who you want to play. But the first thing I usually do is go all the way down here and look for the first viable defense. So none of these guys look great. I don't really want to play any of them. I think the Jets are the first one that makes some sense. You could look at the Commanders, but not a huge fan of that. But the Jets here, 40.5 point over under. Only a 21 point implied team total against them. They're only 3-point dogs on the road in Denver, which kind of sucks. But are we really that scared of Russell Wilson? I know he had a hot start in the first quarter last week, but I think he ended the game with like 15 or 20 more yards. It was awful. The Jets defense really was pretty good last week versus Aaron Rodgers. So I think they're fine at $2,600. 49ers not versus the Chiefs. Colts maybe versus Tannehill. Giants, it's all right. It's really just any of these teams are okay. The Raiders would make the most sense if you have Josh Jacobs. That's probably the best defense you'd want to get to, but they are over $3,000, so I don't want to call them a lock or anything. But yeah, I think the Raiders look good there. But if you're looking for a cheaper one, Jets are fine as well. And I never really spend this much for defenses, but if you have the money for them for some reason, go for it. I won't stop you, I guess. So moving back over to our lineup, we have 4 spots to fill out here. And please don't copy and paste this. I don't know what I'm playing yet. It's Friday morning. Things can change. I just want to see what fits. Please don't copy and paste lineup to see on YouTube. But if it works out, well, I'm happy for you. But if it doesn't, just know there's no guarantee I ever play these. So $4,200 left for the last 4 spots. Let's just double stack with Dak just to make this easier. I'm not going to go the Dalton Schultz route. He's fine if you want to go there, but I'm going to plug in Gallup. So we have the CeeDee Lamb Gallup, Dak Prescott connection. Ran back with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I feel pretty good about that. Let's take the min price tight end here, which might be kind of hard to find, so I guess I should probably just search him. $2,500. That's going to open up our lineup quite a bit. We're still close to $5,000, factoring a cheap defense. We have Jacobs. Let's just correlate it with the Raiders defense at $3,300. That leaves us $6,200 left for the flex. And that's good enough to get a pretty solid player. We have Breece Hall there at $6,200, which I would feel great about that. Don't love Sutton. Don't love Cooper. Zeke is a good play, but I'm not playing him since I have the passing attack here. So I actually think Breece Hall would be the clear-cut choice here. And if you wanted to save some money at defense, you could upgrade that to like a T. Higgins or a Metcalf, a Swift. Swift, if he plays, would be a fine run back option with the Cowboys stack. I'd have no problem with that, even Joe Mixon. But Doesn't look too bad. So we got Dak, Jacobs, Walker, Lamb, St. Brown, Gallup. In price tight end there, Dolchich. I gotta learn how to say his name, I guess. Brees Hall in the Raiders defense. I don't think that looks too bad. Again, please don't copy and paste this, but just kind of talking through that, it's not a bad looking lineup. And like I mentioned earlier, I do want to run the optimizer here to see who is popping the most as of right now on Friday morning. Obviously, things can change by then, so if someone's not popping, that would be on Sunday morning. That's the reason why. If you have any questions about that, feel free to leave them down below. But no settings here, no randomness, no groups. Just going to straight raw dog it here and hope for the best. But if you are someone that does 150, you have to make sure you set those kind of things up, because if you're not correlating your lineups heavily in large field tournaments, well, you're probably going to get blasted most weeks unless you get extremely lucky. And also have an optimizer for the NBA, which I do update all the way up until lock throughout the day, which if you know anything about the NBA, tons of news that drops. You got to make sure you're on top of things. So if you want access to all this fun stuff, link is down below in the description for that. And it looks like we got our 152 crunch here. So let's look at some of the statistics to see who is popping. So yeah, as you can see, Josh Jacobs, CeeDee Lamb, pretty much the two best plays on the slate. They popped in 100%. When you're a mid-price tight end projected for nearly double-digit points, I am at 8.74. Yeah, you're going to pop a lot because you make things work. Tons of Kenneth Walker, tons of Lockett, lots of Godwin, more than I expected. Lamar Jackson heavily popping. It's a great spot versus Cleveland, though. And if you are going cheap at tight end and some of these cheaper wide receivers and running backs, well, you have some money to spend somewhere, and I don't mind it with Lamar. Titans defense seems to be very popular. I guess I didn't really talk about them when we went over there. Dameon Pierce, who I didn't put in the sheet, but projections like him, so maybe I should have. A lot of Robert Woods, which was surprising. Derek Carr, Joe Burrow. Yeah, I'm not overly surprised at who's popping right now. A little bit less Brees Hall than I expected, but maybe that's more of a defensive matchup kind of thing. Looking at some of the teams here that's popping, lots of Seattle, lots of Vegas, lots of Dallas, Denver just because of the tight end, Tampa, Tennessee, Houston. Yeah, makes sense to me. Tons of that Las Vegas, Houston game, Dallas, Detroit, which is going to be popular. Same for the Chargers and Seattle Seahawks. So yeah, some of the things you can look at with the optimizer here, but not really surprised at who's popping. There's a couple guys that a little bit higher, a little bit lower than what I thought, but that's some of those things that you can even out in your own exposures. With that being said, that's all I got for you guys this week. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. But I'll get out of here. I will stop talking and I wish you all the best of luck.